One communist on the faculty of one university is one communist too many. One communist among the American advisors at Yalta was one communist too many. And even if there were only one communist in the State Department, even if there were only one communist in the State Department, that would still be one communist too many.
The man you saw in the last clip was Republican Senator Joseph McCarthy, who was famous for being vehemently opposed to communism, in people, in countries, and especially in government. His work during the Second Red Scare proved to be a driving force in the unjust and unwarranted firing and arrests of alleged communists and communist sympathizers. In order to understand McCarthy's disdain for communism, one must first understand the history of communism, especially communism in America, up to the Second Red Scare. The Communist Party USA was established in 1919 after the Bolshevik October Revolution in Russia and the subsequent formation of the Soviet Union. There was an unfortunate timing, as only 2 years earlier the First Red Scare had begun. After the October Revolution and the official declaring of the communist desire for world revolution, mass hysteria took control of the public. Anything bad that had happened in America from 1917 to 1921 was blamed on communist and socialist radicals. Race riots, especially those instigated by the National Guard, were blamed on agitation from communists and Bolsheviks. May Day, a holiday commonly called Labor Day, turned violent after peaceful demonstrations around the country broke out into riots and violence caused by fascists and police. The first Red Scare ended with the 1920 presidential election, when the winner of the election, Warren G. Harding, said, quote, "Too much has been said about Bolshevism in America. It is quite true that there are enemies of government within our borders. However, I believe their number has been greatly magnified. The American workman is not a Bolshevik, neither is the American employer an autocrat." Fast forward 27 years to 1947. World War II has just ended a year ago. The Soviets had taken vast swaths of land in Eastern Europe, and the Cold War had begun. In the words of Winston Churchill,
"From Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, an iron curtain has descended across the continent."
In addition to the new Iron Curtain, the Soviets had recently tested their first nuclear weapon, and NKVD spies Elizabeth Bentley and Whittaker Chambers testified that Soviet spies had penetrated the US government before, during, and after the Second World War. This caused mass paranoia and hysteria in the American people, soon leading to the Second Red Scare. Senator Joseph McCarthy took a leading role in accusing and trying several people accused of being communists. These accusations were often based on little to no evidence, and if there was evidence, it was often fabricated or faulty. This led to the use of the word Mcarthyism to denote the accusation of political opponents of a crime based on poor or improper evidence. In Bridge of Spies, a 2015 historical drama and thriller, the political situation in both the US and the Eastern Bloc are accurately depicted. Both sides are paranoid regarding espionage from the other, and so-called communists in the US are harassed and arrested. In The Crucible, a 1952 play by Arthur Miller, the Salem witch trials are used as a metaphor for McCarthyism. Miller later wrote, quote, "The more I read into the Salem Panic, the more it touched off corresponding images of common experiences in the 50s.
One communist on the faculty of one university is one communist too many.
Okay, we're going in. We'll come in low out of the rising sun, and about a mile out we'll put on the music. Music? Yeah, use Wagner.
The clip you guys just saw was from the movie Apocalypse Now, an obvious allusion to Wagner's piece, Flight of the Valkyries. Our group specifically chose this as a pop culture allusion source because of its iconic role in cinema. Now into the main topic of our video. Richard Wagner was a German musician and artist during the 19th century. His unique works, plays, and composition inspired many in both his time and the present. In his own time, he had quite a standing in the aristocratic world, and as anyone with such a stance, Wagner had many of his own philosophical and practical ideas. They range from the existence of man to using special musical techniques during operas to associate different characters with different themes. In this video, we'll cover how Wagner, through his works and thoughts, influences the figures of yesterday and today. Before jumping into Wagner's influence, let's talk about Wagner himself. Wilhelm Richard Wagner was born on the 22nd of May, 1813. For reference, the US had only been a recognized nation for barely 3 decades at this point. Europe, as you may be able to tell by the map, was a very different place. The imperialistic movements and actions of European superpowers were the driving force behind the lines on maps defining the contemporary world. Take note that Wagner himself, dying in 1883, never witnessed the devastation and glacial reshaping of Europe after 2 consecutive world wars. As a developing young man, the works of Beethoven and Mozart influenced him heavily, first igniting his interest in the arts. As a developing adult, Wagner's brother managed to obtain him the choirmaster position at the theater in Würzburg. At the same time, he was 20 years old, Wagner completes his first opera, Delphine, which interestingly enough was not published until after Wagner's death. However, this experience leads him to create better works that garner increasingly larger notability. This notability reaches an all-time high with the opera Rienzi, but was cut short by Wagner's left-wing political activities and his vocal support of socialism. He was shortly after exiled to Switzerland, where he continued to produce artistic works. It was in this stage of his life that the trend of anti-Semitic views manifests itself. Both this and his socialist views play a large role in recent history, so keep them in mind. After about 2 decades of exile, Ludwig II, an admirer of Wagner's contributions, allows the composer and playwright back into the fatherland. Now established in German society, Wagner continues writing articles and composing music into his old age, eventually dying in 1883. Now that we've summated Wagner's life, let's dive into the implications of his life. On the topic of those inspired by Wagner's works, one such infamous individual stands out on history's pages. 2 decades after Wagner's death, Adolf Hitler sees Rienzi, one of Wagner's earlier operas, and forever changes his worldview. Hitler's interpretation of Wagner's work solidifies his rigid national socialistic doctrine and his radical ideas of racial imperialism. 1936 begins the ever-increasing momentum of a radical Germany led by a fanatical fan of Wagnerian ideals. 1939 arrives, and so does one of the greatest conflicts in history. Hitler envelops neighboring countries, assimilating cultures and burning off what he considers inferior. 1941 leads to the invasion of the Soviet Union, one of the largest logistical operations in military history. One must only imagine the Führer leaning back in his chair, listening to Wagner's compositions, as Europe is enveloped in the fire of conflict. This is a more infamous application of Wagnerian works, leaving a black and red stain on the timeline. However, Wagner also, despite his personal views, proposed and implemented practices that still influence the artistic world today. For example, the association of themes with characters in Wagner's operas could not have had a bigger impact on modern cinema. Take for example the scene from Apocalypse Now at the beginning of this segment. Notice how the theme is associated with specific objects? That's a prime example of Wagnerian practices in the arts. History is full of influential people and ideas. Wilhelm Richard Wagner is one such person. For better or for worse, his thoughts and practices have led to conflict, condemnation of race, and creative genius. An interesting combination, to say the least. But what cannot be denied is that Wagner's impact on the world is not only still being felt today, but being alluded to as well. Thank you for watching.